What if the stranger who smiled at you wasn't really a stranger at all? What if the man holding the door had blood on his hands, and you only realized after they were caught that you'd shaken hands with a serial killer? In 1976, my aunt was a junior at the University of Washington. Seattle was different back then. It was quieter and softer, the kind of city where people hitchhiked without thinking twice. Doors stayed unlocked. Strangers smiled freely, and nobody imagined that a clean-cut man with an arm in a cast could be anything but harmless. She had no idea that the man she'd meet that night, the one who smiled a second too long, who asked for help shifting gears, would be Ted Bundy, one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. And somehow, she survived him. She was at the campus library cramming for her finals, psych major, high GPA, the type who took late-night studying seriously. By the time she packed up her books, it was nearly midnight. Her car was parked far, lot 4B, way out on the edge of campus. Only a few dim lights flickered out there, and it was quiet. Way too quiet. As she walked through the near darkness, the silence pressed heavily. Then she heard the crunch of gravel. A brown Volkswagen Beetle crept up beside her. The window rolled down, and the man inside smiled. Dark hair parted neatly, a blue cast on his right arm. His voice was friendly, warm, the kind that made you drop your guard. "Hey," he said. "You heading toward Capitol Hill?" She paused. "Sort of," she replied cautiously. "Great," he said, nodding at the passenger seat. "Need a ride? I've got a busted arm. It's tough driving one-handed." Now, my aunt wasn't reckless, but this was the 70s. Hitchhiking was common, and he looked clean, college-aged, and even respectful. She hesitated. She told me later that there was something about his smile. It looked too perfect and too rehearsed. But she got in. Inside the car, the air felt wrong. A strange mix of old carpet, sweat, and something metallic. She shifted in her seat and noticed it rocked. The passenger seat wasn't bolted down. "Sorry about that," he chuckled. "Had to remove it to move some stuff. Haven't had time to fix it." The road ahead stretched out empty as he drove, asking her casual questions like what she studied, where she was from. When she mentioned psychology, he grinned and said, "Oh, I love brains." She gave a nervous laugh, but he didn't join in. A few minutes later, instead of turning toward Capitol Hill like he said he would, he continued straight, deeper into a darker part of the city. This isn't the way," she said cautiously. Then he replied quickly, "Shortcut, just trying to avoid the traffic." But there was no traffic. It was nearly 1 a.m. She reached for the door, suddenly uneasy, but there was no handle, no lock, just smooth plastic where it should have been. She turned to look at him, with her heart beginning to race, and he simply smiled back at her. That same perfect, practiced smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes. The streetlights disappeared behind them. Then he turned sharply down a dirt road into a forested area filled with towering pines. "Let me out," she said. He didn't answer, which made her raise her voice even louder. "Let me out now!" Still nothing, just the sound of tires on gravel. That's when she saw it, wedged between the seats and a rusted tire iron. She didn't think. She grabbed it and swung. It hit his neck, not hard enough to knock him out, but enough to surprise him. He shouted, swerved the car, and nearly lost control. She reached for the ignition and ripped out the keys. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of the woods. Bundy lunged at her. She bit his hand as hard as she could. Then she kicked the passenger door with everything she had. It finally popped open. The latch had been faulty. She tumbled out and ran. Branches slashed at her, dirt in her mouth, adrenaline in her veins. She didn't stop until she hit the pavement again and flagged down a delivery truck. The driver saw her, barefoot, bleeding, hysterical. She told the police everything about the car, the man, the fake smile. But there was no plate number, no name, just a brown Volkswagen and a blue cast. They said it was probably a close call, maybe a mugger, or maybe a predator. But no one knew yet. 2 years later, she saw him on the news. There he was, with the same boyish face, same calm eyes, same blue cast she'd seen dangling from the window that night. Ted Bundy, the man who admitted to killing more than 30 women, though some believed the number was far higher. The man who stalked libraries, campuses, parking lots, looking for young women who looked just like her, just like a maniac. She didn't scream or drop the remote, but something inside her cracked wide open. Because she realized she had been in that car, had shifted gears for him, had laughed politely at his dark little joke, had smiled back at the predator who had destroyed so many lives. She had sat in the trap and somehow walked away, but not untouched. She never told many people, didn't want to be known as the one who got away, didn't want the interviews, the questions, the spotlight. But at night, it followed her. There were nights she couldn't sleep, nights when she swore she heard his voice, calm, confident, smiling. Nights where her dreams ended in that car, still moving, but this time, the door never opened, and in her dreams, she never said no. She just kept shifting gears. Years passed. Bundy was caught, tried, and sentenced to death in Florida. His name became infamous, a monster in the headlines, a documentary staple, a household warning. But my aunt never celebrated. She didn't believe in closure, because there's something no one talks about when you survive someone like that. It never really leaves you. Sure, you're alive. You keep going. You laugh again, you work, you love, but somewhere in you, quietly, stubbornly, lives the version that didn't get away. The version still trapped in that car, shifting gears, and still listening to the trees blur by, heart hammering, lungs barely breathing. She'd see him in crowds sometimes. Not him, of course, just men who looked like him. That same side-parted hair, that same too clean face, that same smile, polished like a knife. And when they'd catch her staring, they'd smile back. She never took another ride from a stranger again, kept her doors locked even in daylight, switched campuses, eventually moved across the country and started over on paper. But some things, they follow you, like guilt, like the gnawing what-ifs. What if she hadn't noticed the tire iron? What if she hadn't hit him in time? What if she'd closed her eyes for just 1 second too long? She told me once, years later, while gripping the wheel with pale knuckles, that part of her still hears his voice every time she puts her car in drive. Let me show you a shortcut. And sometimes, when she's driving alone at night, With the headlights cutting through fog or rain, she'll glance at the rearview mirror just for a second to make sure the back seat is still empty. You never really know who your neighbors are. That's not paranoia. It's just the truth we're too polite to admit. Back in 2002, I was renting a one-bedroom apartment just outside Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It was the kind of place you end up when your plans fall apart. Not terrible, just forgotten. I was a college dropout, still nursing the bruises from a messy breakup. The kind that leaves your apartment quiet and your nights even quieter. I worked part-time at a gas station just off the interstate. Third shift mostly, the graveyard hours when even the stray dogs sleep. It was enough to keep the lights on, the fridge half full, and to keep my mind distracted enough not to spiral. The apartment complex was small, 8 units in a horseshoe around a cracked concrete lot. It was nothing fancy, but the kind of place where porch lights buzz and the air smells like mildew and fried catfish. It was quiet, and mostly filled with retirees and working-class families. A place where people nodded politely but didn't talk much. Nothing ever happened there. Not until he moved in. Apartment 5B, just 2 doors down from mine, had been empty for a while, weeks, maybe months. Then, one muggy Wednesday afternoon, a moving van pulled up with no warning. No friends helping, no small talk, just one man. He looked to be in his mid-30s, wearing faded jeans and worn-in work boots. The kind of face you forget as soon as it turns away, unremarkable in the most unsettling way. As he passed me carrying a box labeled tools, he gave a slow nod and said, "Evening," with a smile that felt too rehearsed to be real. I nodded back, thinking nothing of it at the time, but something about him lingered in my mind. Not because he was creepy. He didn't stare, didn't hover, but because he seemed too perfect and too normal, like someone cast in the role of friendly neighbor, but reading his lines just a second too late. His smiles never quite reached his eyes, and the way he looked at you made it feel like he was memorizing your features rather than greeting you. We didn't talk until about a week later. I was outside smoking on the steps when he walked over, carrying a toolbox and a flashlight. "Hey," he said, "you got a spare bulb?" My kitchen light's flickering, and I'm out. I didn't, but I offered him a beer. Though he hesitated for just a second, then accepted. We leaned against the railings, watching the sky fade from orange to deep purple. He told me he did construction, said he worked odd hours, mostly renovations on old homes in the parish. When I asked his name, he took a sip of the beer, smiled, and said, "Just call me D." After that night, I started noticing things. Little details that didn't add up. He came and went at strange hours. I'd get home from the gas station around 4 a.m., bleary-eyed and exhausted, only to see him pulling into the lot, headlights off, like he didn't want to be noticed. Other times, I'd glance out my window just before sunrise and catch him already up, pacing the narrow balcony outside his door, barefoot, with muddy boots sitting just beside him. It was like he never really slept. Then one morning, sometime in early March, I saw something that stuck with me. He was outside, shirtless despite the morning chill, scrubbing the back seat of his old car with a bottle of bleach. Steam rose off the vinyl from the heat of the chemical, and every stroke looked frantic. He paused when he saw me watching. He then turned his head slowly and gave me that same slow, polite smile. "Spilled some paint," he said casually. I nodded back, trying to keep my face neutral, But I couldn't ignore the dark smears on the floor mat, stains that didn't look anything like paint. He always waved, always said hi, always too polite. But beneath that courtesy was something else. A vacancy in his eyes, like he wasn't really present, like everything was calculated. Still, I didn't press it. This was Louisiana. Weirdness came with the humidity. But then, the disappearances started. First, it was a college student from just a few blocks away. Then a jogger vanished in the middle of the afternoon. There was no signs of struggle, just gone. A week later, another woman disappeared. She lived alone near LSU. Then another, and another. All women, all young, all taken without a trace. No forced entry, no witnesses, no suspects. By the time the fifth woman went missing, Baton Rouge had changed, as fear crept in like mold under the floorboards. Locksmiths were booked out for weeks. Stores ran out of pepper spray. Families were buying guard dogs. Fathers started walking their daughters to class again. The local news aired the same police sketch every night of a man in his 30s, generic face, cropped hair. No distinct features, just someone you'd probably pass in a grocery store and forget 5 minutes later. And that's what made it so much worse. Because as for the sketch, it looked like anyone, like basically everyone. Like someone who might knock on your door and ask to borrow a light bulb. Then the night everything changed. It was around 1 a.m. I was lying in bed, reading. Rain had just started, and the thunder was rolling low like it was trying to stay quiet. Then I heard it. A thump. Then another. It was slow and rhythmic, like something being pulled or dragged across the concrete lot. I got up, peeked through the blinds, and there he was, in the rain, soaked through, dragging what looked like a rolled-up carpet toward the trunk of his car. It was lumpy, too long and too heavy to be just fabric. I froze, and before I could say Jack, he looked up, right at me, through the rain, through the blinds. And I swear, he saw me. But he didn't wave. He didn't shout. He just opened the trunk, shoved the carpet in, slammed it shut, and drove away, calm as ever. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there with my lights off, watching the lot from the shadows. My heart was pounding, half expecting him to come back and knock on my door. But he didn't. The next morning, the complex was crawling with cops. Someone in apartment 3C hadn't shown up for work. No calls, no answer at the door. The person was just gone, just like that. I told the officer about D, about the car, the hose, the bleach, and then the paint. I even mentioned the rug. I made sure I gave a full explanation of whatever I know without leaving anything out. The policeman scribbled something down on his notepad and said they'd look into it. That was it. No follow-up, no patrols. And for a while, life just kept going. Until they caught him. Derek Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge serial killer. Caught 3 weeks later after DNA tied him to one of the scenes. 7 confirmed victims, and maybe more. His face was everywhere, in the news, newspapers, and the internet. And when I saw it, I dropped my coffee. It was him. The man who smiled too perfectly, who asked for a light bulb, who hosed down his back seat before dawn, who drank my beer. He'd been 2 doors down. I was so scared that I moved the next week. I didn't just pack. I didn't bother to say goodbye to anyone. I just left. Even now, over 20 years later. I still check the peephole when someone knocks. I still look twice when someone new moves in, and still glance over my shoulder in parking lots. Because you don't always know when evil is near. It might wear a work shirt, drink your beer, and knock politely while hiding behind a constant smile. And the only reason you survive might just be because it wasn't you they were after or wasn't your turn. They walked among us, smiling, helping with groceries and complimenting your dog. Monsters who didn't hide in shadows but stood right beside us in the daylight. And if they hadn't been caught, would you have ever known? So next time a stranger smiles a second too long, asks one too many questions, or shows up without a reason, remember, some killers don't stalk in forests or wait in alleyways. They knock on your door,